Cars have really come a long way since the 80s. Folks, this is a 1984 Toyota Camry, fully loaded, every single option, with 48,000 miles. And the thing is like a time capsule right here. But this time capsule shares with us a very important message, because folks will always say old cars are better than new cars. Are you sure about that? Because when you start looking into the details here, we take everything for granted today with new cars and all the options they have and the safety features and whatnot. Because you look at cars in this era, things are very different. In today's video, we're going to do a proper tour of this complete and absolute time capsule. This beautiful 1984 Toyota Camry sedan has 48,000 miles. Don't know where they had this one hidden, but here it is. Let's get started with the tour right after this. So before we get started with the tour of this car, I just gotta say one thing. To me, this car brings a lot of memories and nostalgia for me. If you're born in the 90s, 2000s, and onwards, this is just an old brown blob. What is this doing here? But you're gonna see how much cars have changed significantly. Because this, if you owned this in the 80s, at least where I come from, or something similar to this with this kind of options, you are at the top of the hill. Not even you're at the top of the mountain, because this is fully loaded. We'll talk about all its options. And if you're born 80s and older, this will bring a lot of memories. There's things in this car that came to me as we look into it that's like, oh wow, I totally forgot. That's how we did things back then. It's very interesting. Let's start looking at the details. See, back in these days, manufacturers were not shy to show bolts. And look, there we go. Here's a bolt here. If you look around, there's bolts all over the place, visible. This was the norm. If you do that today, the manufacturers will get a walk of shame. How can you not hide a bolt or put clips? They just didn't do that back then. And then the grille. Oh, where's my giant logo? We don't have it, because actually in the 80s, Toyota didn't even have their current logo. They just wrote Toyota, and you can even remove this one. And then the headlights, block headlights. This is an 80s special. Listen to it. This is glass, folks. And some folks will say, I wish we go back to glass. How about safety? Accidents happen, folks. Let's say you hit a pedestrian, this breaks, that's glass. Yeah, I don't want that. That's why they don't use glass anymore. Plus, it's a lot heavier. The things started to change. And then this was a very brave design here. I mean, this is like pushing it when it comes to design. This is how things were, because the rest of the car, how should I say it? It was drawn with a ruler and no circles, just block. That's how cars in the 80s were. Now let's look at the finer details. I present to you a bicycle wheel. I haven't seen a 13-inch wheel in a very long time. And you know what the best part is? Today, if you want to buy tires at a 13-inch, you're going to have to look for a second. You might have to pay more than a 16, 17-inch wheel. That's the weird part. Folks, this was the norm. And this is an alloy wheel. You know how cool you'd have to be if you have alloy wheels in the 80s? You are the coolest kid in the block if you have alloy wheels. And here's the best part. This was the Toyota logo on these alloy wheels. Again, the coolest kid on the block. And then we look at the more details. Look at these doors. I'm going to open the doors. I want to show you something. Look how small this pillar is. Tiny. You have so much visibility in this car. Here's an interesting thing. Look how low this is. These cars used to be very low. You get in a 25 Camry, this belt line is like here, or possibly higher. Cars have gotten bigger, and we wonder why. Let's talk about that. You get in a side impact here, it's all glass. You have a very small door with very little reinforcement, and worse, the pillar is tiny. There's nothing to protect here. The roof is tiny, slow. There's no reinforcement anywhere here. You get in an accident, this pillar will just pull this roof down and come right in. That's the problem. That's why cars now has a giant pillar here, huge roof structure, huge doors. It's for protections, folks. Because although I feel like in the 80s, that was not a problem. I just feel that way. I look at safety concerns now and all this stuff. Back in the 80s, it's like, we're living in a world of danger. We just didn't, that was the norm. That's how it is. This brings a lot of memories. And let's do a test for those who have lived in when these cars were the coolest thing on the planet. How do you lock this door? Do you guys remember? Let's do a little test. I'll give you a few seconds here while we explain to the younger generation what I mean. So you open the door. Of course, there's no remote. Sorry, we didn't have those cool gadgets back then. You close the lock, which is this one. Then you close the door. Watch what happens to the lock. It opened. Well, that was actually a feature because we did not have remotes. If you forgot your key in the car, by mistake, you pushed this, because the common thing was you're driving, you put your arm here, and this closes. So you can kind of put your arm here comfortably. But if you got out of the car and this is down and you closed it, you just locked your keys in, but you didn't. That was a cool feature. But wait, how do you lock the doors? Because even if I operate the central lock, which this has a central lock, we'll talk about it in a second, it's open again. Older crowds, do you remember how this works? And newer crowds, watch the magic of old cars. No technology, this is mechanical. You open the door, you lock it, you pull the handle, and then you close it, then it's locked. Isn't that cool? So, Jose, are we going to expose you? We are going to expose you. So Jose is the same generation as me. We also grew up with these cars. He forgot this, but Mrs. Carcarnut didn't. So the score is 1 Mrs. Carcarnut, 0 for Jose. Did remember everything else, but this one he forgot it. Going around the back here, again, we were not shy of giant key things because that's the only thing you have with the car. Same thing with the fuel door. And then here's another strange thing to me. This is a total add-on for the US market to have the side markers in the front and the back. I don't think this one has it in the front. Actually, it doesn't. It was not there yet. And then giant bumper in the back. Let's look at the back here. Where's my Toyota logo? There isn't one. And you just have LE, which is very high trim. Very high trim. Toyota Camry. Very old school riding. Super cool. Let's look inside the trunk, which also has a key. Hold on, let me get my remote. There is no remote. This was also an option. Very cool option. You can open the trunk from inside the car. How cool is that? That is probably the coolest thing in the 80s. Because otherwise you're using the key. Look at this trunk. Here's another one of these. We don't have trunks like that anymore. Half the car comes with it. And that is also because of structure. And here's how we used to do things back in these days. Now we make fun of cars that don't have insulation here, and we have literally a cable just hanging here. That's how these cars were, folks. Look at the back. Giant trunk by today's standards. Very deep. This was how trunks were. They were not wide this way. They were wide. They're kind of deep. Because the car is a giant box, there's no swooping thing here. And then you have this. You don't have this in modern cars. Because if you want to put something heavy, you have to carry it all the way up and then down. That was just the norm. Now we kind of thought about it. Well, why don't we just make this part of the trunk so you can load things straight and not have to really stretch your muscles and everything. And look at this latch. I'm just fascinated by how simple that latch is. Because there isn't an electronic lock and remote this and safety that. There's nothing. It's just 4 bolts, this trunk comes out, one cable, and we're done. Simple as that. Let's take a look here. I actually did not look here. Let's take a look. Spare tires here. Let's take a look at that with a very metal thing. People will say this is better than the plasticky, horrible ones we got. I actually don't think, you see already the rust on it. And yeah, here's a spare tire. That's when we were starting with the small spare tire. Actually, I don't think the spare tire actually belongs to this car, because this is a little early for small spare tires, at least where I come from. Maybe in the US that was a different case. And here's another nostalgic thing for you. Look at the taillights. That's how they used to work, if I am not mistaken. Yes, I still remember. Just kind of the entire taillight just comes out. Oh, this probably may need replacement. That's how this used to be. And of course, the notorious thing for these cars where there is a seal around this glass that used to leak and leaks water in the trunk. That was the thing with these cars. It's not just this all 80s cars with this style. Listen to that sound. I love that sound. Let's take a look inside, because that's when things go on overdrive. Look at this interior. I mean, this brings so much memories, folks. Minus the automatic transmission. This is the first time I see an 80s cars with an automatic transmission. We never had that where I come from. But look at this interior. I mean, if that doesn't make you smile in 2025, I don't know what would. Look at these seats. And now let's talk a little bit about the condition of this car. Where has this car been? I don't think anybody drove this car. The seats basically look brand new. I mean, we're covering them up because I'm afraid of getting anything dirty here. But where has this car been? That's the big question. Now let's talk about the massive, fully loaded options that this car have. First, it's another test for the older generation or the youngins. For some reason, you put the key here, you turn it, key is on. I shut off the key. Well, actually, you can't turn it anymore without pushing this button. Just to make sure that you have decided to actually pull the key out, this is the key. That's not the original key. The original key was somewhere here. But let's look at the simplicity of things. And this is just nostalgic to me. It's a cassette. You haven't seen one of these. Maybe now you have. Look at this radio. This is an upgraded radio. Super cool radio where you have your EQ here. And of course, on the radio is running. These are, working. This is the coolest thing after the boombox. I'll show you a little picture of the boombox in case you don't know what that is. This is it. You have the boombox in the car. That was the coolest thing. Look at the simple controls. I love this. So, you have fan, pretty simple. Pressure recirculate. Then we have this. So, warm air, cool air. It's all mechanical, of course. Nothing is electronic here. But I love how this one, the vent, it has like a black, so you can use it for both. Then you have this one, bi-level. You can use it with hot or cold. Then heat. I don't know why does it just say heat, and then defrost. So basically they're trying to tell you use these for cold and these for hot. So they're trying to tell you. You'll figure it out. And then the AC button is a giant button with 2 levels. I don't know if you guys remember this. So Econo is the first click, I think. This was like economy AC where it'll disengage a lot more often, and then you press it a second time. Now it's full blast. Where I come from, it was always full blast. Then we look at a dying relic. These 2 relics over here. This is the case for the younger crowds. This is called a cigarette lighter, where you can light a cigarette, and this is where you put your ashes, cigarette ashtray. That doesn't exist anymore. And then we have here's where Toyota quality was at the beginning. Look at this, how lined this is. This is a Lexus stuff. This is when there was no Lexus and they could do stuff like this in the regular cars. Very nice. But again, exposed screws, I'm not afraid of them. That's just how they used to do things. Then the shifter. The shifter completely looks out of place. Because you have carpet here, we're used to just a manual transmission. The shifter is so strange. It's Did you notice something? That I just moved the shifter without foot on the brake, and there's 17 different things you have to do with modern cars. Yeah, that's how this used to be. So if you're driving along, the only safety you have is this button. If your friend for some reason decides to do this when you're going 60 miles an hour, that will be the end. Let's put it this way. But yeah, we didn't have the safety lock, so the car wouldn't roll. That's what I mean by the welcome to the 80s. This transmission has actually two modes. You have power mode right here and economy mode, and then when they're both off, that's normal mode, as indicated by the little thing here that says that. Let me try to get you a good shot of it. Right here, you even have an indicator that tells you where you're at. And of course, you have overdrive. That actually continued into the 90s. Actually, even some 2000s still have the overdrive off. Love this car. Not the car itself, but for the memories that it brings. And look at this dash. The glasses, this is all the entire thing. Took you 2 minutes to clean this car. Now you have a football field in front of you. Folks, that's all for safety, by the way. Because you get an accident here, like I say, a small overlap, there isn't any structure in front of you. This is how these cars were. We're kind of experimenting. Look at the steering wheel. Of course, no airbag. You could just put whatever shape says Toyota and old school horn. And the hazards. This was another thing. Hazards are here. Now they have to be in a centralized location. The idea behind that is, if you get in an accident and the driver is disabled, or there's an emergency where the driver is incapacitated, the passenger can easily reach the hazard. Well, you can't really, they have to reach over, and that's the whole idea of that. This brings, I love this car, I just gotta say. And then the stocks that were steel. The stock was actually steel, just the plastic part was plastic, but the stock itself, so they make this giant click. The part in the front is very flimsy, so they always were. This car has cruise control. For the life of me, because where I come from, cruise control was not a thing. I mean, power windows were not even a thing, so let alone cruise control. I tried to figure out how this works. I will admit defeat. I mean, you turn it on, set. I don't know how the coast works and the resume. I just gave up. I don't even trust it. But the mirror, this has power mirrors. And if you look at the mirror, look at it right there. You see that little, there's like a clip here, like something was supposed to be there. Well, that was the manual adjustment. So because this has the high option one, you just get a little plug and you get an actual switch to control the power mirrors. Pretty cool. Just love the simplicity of this. And finally, we have a car that has an actual sunroof, which everybody calls it a sunroof. If you look here, this is a solid panel roof. So it's not a glass, because the glass one is actually called a moon roof. This is a sunroof. So the moon roof is you can open the shade and see through it and you can see the moon. This one you can't. You have to open it, then you see the sun. That's the whole idea of the naming. Let's look at the back seat here. There's another relic in the back seat. Where's my seat belt? Well, it's a lap belt. I'll come to the 80s. This has lap belts, doesn't have seat belts. And the way I would explain this is basically a couch that they made to fit here. There's no other way to explain it. And look how close, again, look how close you are to the glass. Modern cars, you will not see that a lot because obvious safety reasons. And again, we were not shy in the 80s of connectors. This is the defroster. If you do that in a modern car, it's like a crime in the manufacturer's eyes. So that, yeah, it's right here. If you want to fix it, you know, it's right there. You want to test the grid, you don't have to take anything apart. That's how they did this. Look at that headliner. This particular car is like amazing how clean it is. This is basically new. And look at the cover here for the sills. You have two screws visible These are all clips now. Love this car, folks. They don't make cars like this anymore. And I want to show you something that I've never seen before, but I guess this one has it. So this is a cloth seat, or velour, as they love to call it. The back of it is actually leather. It's just how things were back then, because they couldn't make a leather strong enough that would withstand elements and whatnot, except in very high-end cars. This one has leather in the back of the seat, and the rest of it is not leather. That's the strange thing. This is what they had laying around, and that'll do. With that, we could keep going here for hours because it's very nostalgic. Let's take a look under the hood, because this is where another relic of the past lives, which I am grateful it lives there. I just gotta say that. This is a 2SE engine. It's a 2-liter, 4-cylinder engine, and let's just put it this way, be glad this engine is gone, because while it was very reliable, truth have to be said, but by today's standards, this is mega complicated for what little that it does. Let's look at the interesting things here. So this is the original emissions control information. 2SE Fed, that means federal. This is not, I guess, not California. And if you look here, it actually says somewhere here, where was it? Here we go. Engine displacement, 121.7 cubic inch. This is when they were entering into the US market heavy and they wanted to put it in cubic inch. I have a small block Camry, 121 cubic inch. It's a 2-liter. But keep it simple. Here's the interesting things about this, and we'll take a look underneath it as well for you guys to see how things have come. This was a groundbreaking technology right here. So I believe the Celica Supra at some point started that in the 4M. Don't quote me on the exact year that they started. That was the first fuel-injected engine. This is a very modern fuel-injected engine at the time, because it was an engine that could start in the cold weather and run on its own, had a pretty sophisticated system for that. Let's just say one thing. When we're talking about modern cars compared to this, and I mean, do you see that 1993 Toyota MR2? That is a very modern car. This is not modern. Because let's dive into some of the small details here. First, this is a single overhead cam. That's just how they did it. But what's the complication? You have a tiny little valve cover here. That's what that is. And then you have a giant cam tower or cam carrier. This is where the cam is. And then the cylinder head. I know they make modern engines like that too, but this is an engine where it's a 2-valve per cylinder. So the exhaust and the intake are on one side. You don't have exhaust from the one side of the engine and the other. That's why you have the spark plugs here. So a lot of engines in this era, even before it, were super accessible, super simple. Something about this engine is simple to work on. That's about the only good thing in 2025 about it. Here's the problem with this engine. The level of complication to make the emission system work, and this was heavy emission territory, made this engine just extremely complicated for the time. Here's why. So the way this engine starts in cold weather, it does have 4 injectors, regular electronic fuel injection, but it has another cold start injector in the back. Now at this time, 80s computers were not like this. They were more like this. Yeah. So they actually could not figure out a way to make a logic that reads the temperature of the engine, and when it warms up, it shuts off that fuel injector. So here's what they did. They put a timer that is activated by temperature, that when that timer runs out, the injector shuts off. And that timer gets triggered by temperature. And then there is a lot of these. Every time you see this, just smile. That is a vacuum thermal switch. I believe that's what they're called. So it's basically a passage of vacuum that gets open when it's or either open or closed when it's cold, and then it closes when it's hot, or vice versa. Because this is a coolant housing, so every time this warms up, it'll either let vacuum go through, or it'll close it. Depends on the application. Because this engine has EGR, and it has just a super complicated cold start mechanism. I mean, just watch this. There is a coolant temperature here, and there's another one here, and there's another one here. That's just how these cars were. So diagnosing these cars when they have issues, yeah, you're gonna be there for a while. Especially in today when you can't get any of these sensors, and you're kind of buying a used one and hoping it works, and then it doesn't because they all had the same problems. First, the timer will go out, then there's another switch. I believe one of these two will go out, and this thing won't start when it's cold. Then the cold start injector will go out, and by the time you find these three, one of them will malfunction or something, and they won't start when it's cold. Once it warms up, everything runs great. This is a common thing with this engine. Timing belt engine, that's the cool thing about it. Very simple timing belt. Distributor engine. And wouldn't you love the location of this distributor? Right in front. Very proud. And this was the years when they were using this style, the door style, mass airflow. Horrendous. But here's something I love, and I wish they would have carried it on into the 90s, even into some of the 2000s. Look at the heater valve. So this is a valve that opens the coolant flow to the heater core or blocks it. It's steel. I wish we'd have that into the 90s, not that horrendous plastic one that now we are replacing left and right. I wish that if we had made it steel, it would have been perfectly fine. That's what they did. So this particular car, this was actually optional. This has the option for the AC, but the AC has been, for some reason, the compressor has been removed. I don't know why. We haven't really looked into it, because if you look here, I just have an AC line just kind of sitting here. So I do believe, initially I thought, well, maybe this car doesn't have that option, but actually it does, because all the plumbing for the AC is there. I see it. All the lines are there. Everything is there except the compressor. Now this, of course, takes R12, which we don't have anymore. And big conversation with the customer if they actually want to add it. I don't know how we have to convert it to 134, so we'll see. But how about this? Let's put this car up in the lift. Then we'll wrap up this video. Check it out underneath. Let's continue our nostalgia tour underneath this 84 Camry. And this, Jose actually mentioned this right before we filmed this. Does anybody can walk up to your car in the 80s and take your lens, take your lower valence, which this is another very important piece? Yes, that's how these cars were. So we wonder why cars don't have stuff like that anymore, because we can walk up to them and just help themselves do things, basically. This one is missing actually a cover, which I'm surprised by. This is such a low mile example. The tires, yeah, we do need new tires. If I am not mistaken, and we looked at this car already, I think a couple tires were newer, but this one, if you bring the light, Jose, and the cameras, you can see it together. This one is from 2001, this tire. There are folks watching our video right now who are younger than that. That's the best part. So yeah, these tires need to go. But let's continue our tour. Let's look at the front suspension here for a second. There is this tiny little control arm, and this is a sway bar going through it. If you follow this, here's the bushing of the sway bar. That's a sway bar. It kind of goes through the control arm, and that's about it. One ball joint and the McPherson strut to the top. And that's it. And single piston caliper, tiny brakes. I mean, this is probably motorcycles today have much bigger brakes than this, but yeah, I mean, it's 13-inch wheel, so this has to fit it. So that's about it. That's all the front suspension. There isn't much to it, but there's one small relic. So this axle, which is leaking, goes to this wheel. That's somewhat standard. Nothing special about it. But this side is very special. You see this bearing here? That's normal. You see that in modern cars. This axle actually attaches here. See these bolts? And then there is a U-joint right there. You see it? You don't see that anymore. So it's a double joint. Just to add more complication to this, because this joint was not enough, they had to put that. That's how they did this. And this car, I think, has been sitting for a very long time. That's why it has a lot of leaks, power steering's leaking, engine oil leaks. Cars are not meant to be sitting, folks. But this radiator is actually original. You notice that's when they did this hose. And if you look at the neutral safety switch, that's actually a similar style they still use today. Pretty interesting. This looks exactly the same. They used it since then. This section of the exhaust, I think, has been repaired or replaced at some point. Rack and pinion sits all the way up here. I think if my memory serves right, the last car that had this style rack and pinion sitting here, it's like generation of the Corolla from 98 to 2002. Was also had it and had the same strange cutout in the body for it right here for the tie rod to come out of. Then we look at the interesting relics here. The floor doesn't have a big dip in the middle and it's flat. There's absolutely nothing in there. It has this waviness, folks. This is how they are. This is not damage to this car. And then Toyota in this era, yes, a little bit into the 90s, they love to route their brake lines right at the edge. This is how they did them. They never ran them in the middle. They always ran them at the edge, and then they come back to the middle and they spread around. And this was one of the safer cars of the 80s. Fuel tank is actually here, not here. That's how most cars had them. You get in an accident, fuel tank is right here. This one is actually here. Very, very cool. But I can't help but stand here and I see them modern Toyotas. This is where they begun. The location of this fuel tank. Now here, they didn't want this fuel tank to have a dip in it, so they routed the exhaust this way, like they did 290s. They usually, manufacturers don't like to do 90s like this if they don't have to. But you see 290s here, and then it goes to the muffler, just to avoid the fuel tank. And of course, this fuel tank is steel, so it has a drain plug. Very cool. I wish cars still have that. That's one of the things we miss. But it's the same style fuel tank strap. If you look here, they have a pin and a little lock. They still use that style. I think very recently is when they're starting getting away from it, but they use that style for a very long time. And here is another relic, a very leaky fuel pump that is outside. This is again how cars used to be. This is actually on the end of this style. Let's look at the rear suspension, because if you own not the most modern Toyotas, but 2000s, 2010s, this look super familiar, this design. They actually used it, folks, and they just updated these. So if you look underneath, like 2010 Camry, that generation, you'll see something similar to this. The arms will just be smaller, and that's where you adjust your rear toe. You adjust it here. It's a very similar design. It's just a lot smaller. And these arms were huge. Now they're much smaller. And these are more spread apart. But it's still McPherson strut in the back. Very simple. Of course, drum brakes in the back. Very small drum brakes here. And just things are extremely simple. Look at here. You have your drain. And of course, there's nothing electronic here. This is wide open. You can actually see sunlight through it. It's the best part. What a beautiful car. But here is the surprise to me. I'm just going to tell you this. There are some things here. I mean, this is a very old generation, folks. I mean, we briefly kind of mentioned that 93 MR2. That is the next generation to this car, and that's a 93. That is a 93. But I see stuff that, I mean, this cable routing and the way they mount it, they still do that today. I mean, they don't have parking cables anymore. They still do that up to the point where they don't have parking cables anymore. And look at this. Body plug. Exactly the same as newer cars, folks. This is, I think, the recipe of Toyota. This is what I'm going to call it, the recipe of Toyota. They just don't change certain things. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. When they go all overboard changing stuff is when they have issues. And then eventually, hopefully, they fix them up. That's what they're having right now. They're having a lot of changes. And they have issues. I hope they work them out, because This is when Toyota was a small company, folks. And you see it. There's certain things. It's like, why did you route these here and use all this length? You could have just brought them straight here. It's the same thing. But this is the things where growing pains, if you would. You see that a lot of that here. What a beautiful. I love this car. I hope that has been clear in this video so far. And that is the nostalgia tour, at least for me. Hope for others as well. This is such a beautiful car. And this is such an important moment, at least for me. You know, we work on modern cars. We work on some 90s cars. We work on all kinds of cars here in the shop. But every once in a while, we get a car from the 80s, and it's like, wow, we've come a long way since the 80s. I just gotta say, from every level. As much as I love this car, you get into something like this and you get into a modern car, then you realize how much cars have changed over the last 30, 40 years. It's amazing. That's all I'll say. I hope you guys have enjoyed the tour of this, and just this particular car, 48,000 miles, just beautiful. It's like a time capsule. I hope you guys enjoyed the tour of this as much as I have and Jose have. We just loved it. From the moment it showed up in the shop, we just can't stop looking at it. Same thing with Mrs. Car Care. We're all super nostalgic about it. But I hope you enjoyed that as well as we have. I hope you learned something new in between. And until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.